there, readers. Trisha Goyer here, and I am so happy to be here with Elizabeth Dawson. So, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Little bit. This is always my favorite part. No.
I know.
I grew up in Southeast Asia and I've moved a lot throughout my entire life. Right now, live in Idaho with one of my best friends, and I am a grad student studying philosophy when I'm not writing fiction.
That is so cool. Okay, so grad student, international traveler, writing fiction. That is so cool. That's so many things. And today we're going to be talking about your book, Sing to Me of Rain. And why don't you hold it up? Because the cover is so beautiful. Yes, it's so beautiful. And there's the emblem on there because
Mhm.
it won for middle grade fantasy at Railmakers this year. So were you at Railmakers when they
No, I was
no?
actually out of the country with my parents, so I didn't get to go.
Ah,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, well, it was fun. It was so fun to have you win, and, I've been reading it, and it is just this beautiful story and this beautiful writing, but why don't you start by telling us a little bit about it?
So, I'm obsessed with rain. No.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So the title makes sense. I think, it's an Asian-inspired fantasy, so it's very close to my heart because I grew up in Southeast Asia,
Mhm.
and, you don't see as much of those cultures celebrated. So
Yes.
I wanted to draw in those elements that were familiar with me or to me. At the beginning, there's, a verse from Proverbs or in part of the epigraph about the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Mhm.
And there's also a quote from the Silmarillion. So it's really exploring this idea of common grace in the world and how it makes sense in light of suffering and evil. But it's also just a beautiful adventure and exploration and a fun escape. So,
Yes, and so it's like there's the weather masters, and then there's all these
mhm.
creatures, and then there's this journey. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's so like, if you're just picking it up and thinking it's gonna be like, "Oh, this normal, ordinary person and the adventure." No, it's, like, so unique. So tell us, like, how you came with the characters and just who the main characters are to first to start with.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So one of the main characters is Plip, and she's a water naiad. So she lives in a waterfall. There are these tiny little naiads who live in this waterfall and help to sing to create the weather of the world. And I kind of started coming up with these ideas when I was house sitting for my aunt, and her house looks over a lake, and their storms would just roll in over the lake, and so
Mm.
it's just had a lot. I love weather, but she meets this boy Aquino, this little angry, kind of wounded little boy who's trying to make sense of his life, and they on this adventure and go explore the world. So it's kind of new to both of them. Along the way, they have different adventures, but it's
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah.
then, like and then there's the weather masters that's how it starts out with this one weather
Yes.
master, and that's where she meets him, and then they like you said, they go on adventures, and at first, you think he's gonna be well, he is at first, this little boy is naughty. And then
He
but
is a
then
little naughty.
as they're going along, they build this friendship where the decisions start changing because there's
Mm,
friendship involved, which is so cool to see that, like you said, this little naiad is just like wanting to be helpful and I will help
mhm,
you. And then her friendship really changes him. And then you see how that
mhm,
changes over the course of the book.
mm,
So I think it's so interesting for kids. They love reading stuff with just fantasy and these characters and this journey. There's a search for a mother. So it's like these familiar themes, but completely new world. Like
mm,
completely, you don't know at first, like, oh, is this a friend? It's a foe. Then you're like, oh wait, this is a friend. Oh wait, no, this is a foe. Like it always has you trying to follow along and figure out what's going on. So where did you come up with the idea of like this journey and this friendship and how that changes in the course of
mhm,
the book?
mhm. Part of it is the friendship journey. I think just I love that kind of foil of Plip is so innocent and naive,
Mhm.
and Aquino, even though he's little, he's pretty jaded by the world, and
Mhm.
having
Mhm.
those 2 to play off each other, because I feel like I have both those inside of me. There's the
Mhm.
innocent side, and there's the side that's been very jaded by the world, and so, like, for me, it was a healing journey for myself because the questions they ask, like, even each other, are, like, questions I've wrestled through. So to be able
Mhm.
to explore those through both these characters and to balance it out, was kinda cathartic, so
Yeah, that's really neat, and I like how it was so funny because you talk about she's really naive, and she's like, "I'm 7 weeks old," or something like that. It
Yeah.
was so cute. And it's just like this whole fantasy element, which is so fun because I think when you go into a new world and you said like it's Asian inspired, and
Mhm.
there is like this different just the way things are described are different. And my daughter, who's 18, loves everything Asian culture. Like I'm gonna have
Mm.
to pass this book over to her when I'm done with it. But like she just loves all that. So how do you think like the storytelling is different, like being inspired by like Asian culture than maybe fantasy books that we're more familiar with?
That is a good question. I think, um, I don't know structurally if I borrowed because I'm not super familiar with like storytelling structure from those cultures. I think mostly it's like in the worldview and
Mhm.
like the characters and how they look at the world and how they respond, which a lot of it is more intuitively ingrained in me. But I think just different expectations and of what they view as good and honorable or what they're willing to put time into or kind of accept as status quo are just slightly
Mhm.
different from like the Western perspective world. And so it kind of gives you this, you're not as easily able to predict, like you said, who's the maybe the dangerous people and who are the nice people. And I think that's true from a child's perspective too. They don't fully understand how to read those signs, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, it's just a I think it makes you see the world a little differently and, what matters in life and what, how you wanna live your life, kind of a different perspective of, um, what's worth investing time into, maybe.
Yeah. So how long does it take you to write a book? So like for example for this one, is it
Mhm.
something that you spend years doing or does it just once you start it just comes quickly?
It really depends. I I had a couple books that took a couple of years. This one probably took 9 months,
Okay.
some maybe close to a year, and just in drafting, and then there was some editing, so it may have done a year total. So it really depends on what's going on in my life and, like, the other responsibilities I have, and then, like, where I'm at creatively, and also how much, like, the story is challenging me. Sometimes when I write a series, if it's the 2nd or 3rd book, I know the world, I know the characters, and so
Right.
it's much easier to stay on pace. If it's like, "No, this is completely new," it's usually a little slower.
Yeah, that's
So,
and this is the first in the series, right? Are you working
yes.
on the ones to follow?
I, have done a lot of brainstorming, and I think I've written a first chapter for the 2nd book, but mostly conceptual at this point, but I'm determined because 'cause I'm in love with them already, so
I love that, yes. I know the
yeah.
characters are very endearing once you get in there. I love that. So, you talked about other books that you've written. Tell us
Mhm.
about those because I would love to hear more.
Yeah, so I actually started out, in science fiction and, um, the majority of my books, I guess, are science fiction, and then I have a high-tech fantasy, and most of those are adults,
Mhm.
you know, probably age 13 and up just for the, topics and the subject matter, though they are clean. But so I have a series called The Creation of Jack, which is 4 books that deals with a lot of classic sci-fi tropes like artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, and really examining a lot of some philosophical questions about free will and autonomy and what it
Mm.
means to be human, and also what it means like to make a difference in the world, like when you feel like your agency is taken away from you, which is and healing from brokenness. All themes very important to
Yeah.
me. So, and then I have a high tech fantasy trilogy that's a crossover worlds that deals with colonization and kind of this tension between what we can see and what we can't see with science and technology versus like the unknown and almost more the supernatural. But um, so that one is fun, but very different in its own way. And then I have a couple science fiction retellings where I just take classic stories like Beauty and the Beast and Sherlock Holmes and Moby Dick and
That
put
is so
them
cool.
I love them. To put them in science fiction settings and just have fun. So,
That is so cool. And so and also I wanna mention she writes under EB Dawson. So
yes.
that, if you're looking for Elizabeth Dawson, you're not gonna find it, but look under EB Dawson. I'm looking on the Amazon page right now, and even the covers are, like, so good. I just
Thank
love
you.
all the colors and all the imagery, and it's awesome. So, I mean, you've done a lot of writing. So how many books do you have out? Because
I
you're
have
like, and
10.
then there's this, and
I
then there's
know.
this. Yeah.
So I do have 10 out, and it's I've been writing for a while.
I love that.
So,
I'm going to graduate school. I
yeah,
mean,
you know.
just, yeah. So for those who maybe have, like, love fantasy or science fiction or any kind of speculative fiction, what advice would you give them when it comes to actually bringing those books to life?
Mm. It's kinda my grad student's gonna show here, but I actually am very passionate. I think you need to study a little philosophy because fantasy and science fiction are
Mm,
so concept heavy and like exploring ideas. You have to actually, and even just the world building, in order to build the world, you need to like understand some metaphysics and epistemology and ethics. I think it's crucial when you don't really have an idea even of how our world functions. I think it comes through really obviously, and when you create a spin-off world, there's just a shallowness to it, and it's just restricted unless you kind of understand the foundation. So it takes work, but it's worth doing the research and um, figuring some of that out.
yeah, and I would say, like, there is such a big readership now for those
Mm,
types of books. So I have 2 sons, one's 33 and one's 29, and they read all the time. Like, they're
mm,
just going through books, and I think a lot of people say, "Oh, the younger generation isn't reading." I have found the
mm,
opposite. They read, I think, a lot, and they read a lot of kind of in the speculative fiction, and
mm,
they like books with depth and all these characters
mm,
and all these complex themes, which is a little bit different. They're not reading prairie romance. It's different, but,
mhm,
I went to Real Makers for the first time 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
mm,
Yeah, I've been there twice, so I guess I've been yeah, anyway, a couple of years ago, went to Real Makers for the first time, and my husband loves watching sci-fi, and a lot of it is, like, the campy B
mm,
sci-fi, and I'm like, "Ah, it's kinda cheesy," and
mhm.
so I took some books home from Rail Makers thinking it's kinda gonna be like that, and I've been so
Mm,
impressed with the skill of the writing, the depth of the stories, the themes. I read a lot of speculative fiction now because 'cause I'm, like, intrigued by it, and I
excellent.
think what you're saying is true. I think if people don't read speculative fiction, they might not understand, like, there is a lot of complexity
Mhm,
in writing speculative fiction because you are creating whole worlds and sometimes languages
mhm,
and different
mhm,
governments and different ethics and different, world views, and all these things go into these books, and so that takes a lot of time, and it makes me because I write mostly Amish fiction and World War II fiction, although my first speculative fiction will come out next year that I wrote with my son, one of my
Oh.
sons. Um, but it's a whole different thing because I'm just like, "Oh, World War II, let me just research what was
Yeah.
there," instead of coming up with this whole thing. So, I think that's super interesting that, you talk about, like, you do have to understand kinda our world, and then to create a different world, there's a lot that goes into it, I think, than more people would even consider. And so maybe those that haven't read speculative fiction before, try some of it, check it out because I think I was pleasantly surprised because
Mhm.
my kids were always like, "Mom, you need to read this book. Mom, you need to read this book." I'm like, "Whatever, I'm not gonna." And then I started reading the stuff they love, and so I was just at the ballpark tonight with my grandson. And my daughter-in-law, because I had given her Secrets in the Mist by Morgan Bussey, and
Mhm.
she's like, "Did you read that before you gave it to me?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "It's so good." I'm like, "I know." But so I'm like my little 20, she's probably like, how old is she? 28, 29-year-old daughter-in-law, we're having these conversation about these speculative fiction books. I feel like the cool
Fun.
hip Nana now
You
because
are, well done.
because I'm reading all these things. So I love it. So I'm so glad that you talked about that because I think and there are so many readers. And also people say my grandkids are reading or
Mm,
my children are reading, and I don't really like what they're reading, like teens and in their 20s. And so this book is, Sing to Me of Rain, and then other books by EB Dawson, and then other speculative fiction books are perfect because they're going to really interest them. And a lot of subtle messages can get told in these stories. You're not going to pound it over their heads, but like you're saying, good and bad and evil and trust and truth, all these are themes that come out in your book, but it's not like there's a sermon in there.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So, you mentioned growing up in Southeast Asia. I want to. I just have to hear more about that because I got to tell my daughter because she loves everything Asian.
Well, my dad was a bush pilot, so we were in the jungle, and he was flying his little airplane. So it was on the island in New Guinea, so it's kind of a unique, very unique little subculture in the world.
Hmm.
But we ate lots of rice, and I don't know. It's just had lots of little adventures in the jungle. Beautiful animals, and the fruit was amazing. I mean, American fruit is just, I don't know, it's different. I miss tropical fruit. It's
I
the
bet.
best.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I bet. Did you read a lot? Is that how you got
I
into becoming a
did.
writer?
I mean, it's probably, I had some excellent teachers in my life who, we had these small little classrooms, but would feed me books, but also, um, yeah, I was some when I got sick, I got malaria a couple times, and on the
Mm,
recovery is a long process, and I would just read because your sleep pattern get off as a kid, and you'd be everyone's asleep, and you're like, "Man, I can't sleep." I would just read through the night sometimes when I was sick, and it was, like, really helpful, so I
yeah,
think that really started my love of books.
that is so cool. So when
Yeah.
did you decide at that age that you wanted to become an author, or when did you really decide?
No, I mean, I started toying around with writing in middle school and high school, but it wasn't super. There was this sort of like, oh, maybe I'll publish a book one day. But I had lots of interests. So
Mhm.
I'd like write a little and then abandon it. My sister and I would write together for a while, sometimes on and off. I think it was when I started college, I think one my first Christmas break for some reason was like, I'm gonna write. Like I don't know what if it was the academic. I was so
Yeah,
tired of
your
studying.
brain is, like, ready to do
Yeah.
something creative after all the studying.
But
But
that's when
funny that it
I
just didn't shut off, like, it coulda just shut off
yeah.
or then just, like, watched all those Hallmark movies or something, or I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I've always wanted to write, the stories that entertain me the most. So it's like, I
Mhm.
wanna write the story that so it was entertaining, but that's when I really started my first novel. So and it took a while before I actually published, but I had a couple of manuscripts already by then. But so it's been, yeah, probably I don't know how old I am now. No. 14 years or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's been a journey since then. So and now I can't stop.
That's awesome, that's awesome. Man, I'm just imagining your brain just must be working all the time to be doing school and writing all these books too.
Yeah, well, there hasn't been much writing during school, but I have summer break now, and so now I have a whole reading list, and I have some dreams of getting some drafting done. So it'd be
Good. So do you know what
cool.
book you're gonna work on next? Is it gonna be one in the series or something else that
I think so. For Sing to Me of Rain, I'm hoping to do 4 books in the series, and they're each kind of focused on an element. So this first one is rain, the
Mm.
second one is fire, and that's the one I
Ooh.
really want to start working on next. I have lots of ideas for, so
Oh, very
it's a
cool.
little teaser.
There we go. Yeah, so they could be looking for that maybe next year. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, I don't know, but
She's
but
like, "Don't put any
sometime.
pressure.
I
Don't put
know.
any pressure." Awesome. Okay, so one thing that I love to ask too is like, what books have you loved, especially Christian fiction, that because the readers here just love to hear all about that.
Mhm. Chronicles of Narnia has been a huge,
Mhm.
and I think I'm now realizing I never thought I would write middle grade fantasy, but when I finally landed on it, it was like this makes so much sense. And then I've been rereading Chronicles of Narnia, and I'm like, oh, of course,
Yeah.
because this is what I grew up on, what I love. But I've also been rereading right now "Till We Have Faces" by C.S. Lewis, which I never read until a couple years ago.
I have
I
not
don't
read that book, I have to say.
It's amazing. It's, like, intense, though. It's so different from his other work, but beautiful, and it's such a journey. Like, the beginning, I did not like the beginning, and because the world is very harsh, and the narrator is just very different, and, um, the world is, and you're trying to figure out, like, how is he gonna use these elements? Because it's a very pagan environment, because he's retelling
Mm.
this myth. But slowly as it goes, you see this emotional complexity and this, like, complex, allegory, even as they're dealing with, um, these mythologies. You see these, like, this journey, and it's reflects, you know, for myself, struggles that I've had, in my relationship with God, and even just my relationships with other people. And by the time you get to the end, you're just like completely undone. This is
Oh,
me anyway. Maybe
wow.
not you, but and like really the last chapter just like kills you. It's lazy, but in the best way. It's just it makes you think differently and look at the world differently. It's just so rich and deep because it's C.S. Lewis. So
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna have to definitely check that out. I've been
Yeah.
rereading, so the Chronicle or yeah, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then The Magician's Nephew, our 2 girls had to read them for they were in a co-op this last year, and then my son's in that class because they do the same books every year. So now I'm gonna be reading it with my son, and I just
Mm.
remember on The Magician's Nephew, like, when Strawberry turns into Fledge, that whole part, I'm just like, "This is so amazing." I'm like crying, and my kids are looking at me, they're like, "It's a horse turning" I'm like, "This is so much symbolism, and we just have to believe, and, like, God has so many more plans for us than we can even imagine." And my kids are like,
Yeah.
"Mom, it's a horse." Like, it's so funny, but I love, like, reading those when you're younger, and then it seems like every time you read that really like C.S.
Mhm.
Lewis or some of that really rich Christian fiction, that you can see so much more symbolism that before it's just like the story and it's, like,
Mhm.
interesting, but then as you reread it later, it's like, "Oh
Mhm.
my goodness, this is amazing." So, and then seeing just so many ties between his books, and yeah, it's really fun. So that's one thing I love about having kids is because I get to reread a lot of the stuff, that I probably never would have gone back to reread that it's just
Mm.
it's so
It's
good.
true. You find hidden depths. That's wonderful. Mhm.
Yeah. So, okay, so and you live in Idaho now. So we lived
Mhm.
in Montana for
Mm.
15 years and love the area.
Mhm.
And you said it's finally getting warm in Idaho.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, we had a crazy spring. I mean, it snowed up into April, which is unusual for the valley here. And then suddenly last week it just got real hot, like up to 90s or something. And we're like, we can't take this. It's going from cold to hot. But today it's just 70s again and it's beautiful. And spring came like all at once. And so there are flower petals like showering the air and it's absolutely beautiful. So
And I will have to
mhm.
say the Northwest, like, there's nothing like a summer up in the Northwest because it's
Yeah.
so warm during the day, and then it's cool in the evening usually, and then it's just beautiful, so, yeah. It's a
Mm.
perfect environment to write all those books that you're gonna write this
I
summer.
know, I know.
So that's gonna keep you busy.
Mhm,
Very cool. Okay, so for those who are like, "Okay, I wanna definitely check out these books," where can readers go to find out more about you and
mm.
more about your books?
Yeah, so, I they're all on Amazon, they're also wide across on Draft to Digital, they have a, author page on Amazon, I have an author page. Right now, those are the central locations for my books because 'cause I'm kind of rethinking and reconfiguring my website, so I don't have a solid website right now. But, and then I am on Twitter, it's the main platform I'm on right now if you want to interact with me, but there's also a link in my, um, bio that has links to all the books and stuff.
Yeah, well, when I
Um,
went onto Amazon, everything popped up there, so I'm like, "Oh, gonna check out these next too." So super fun. Now are you gonna be at Realm Makers this year coming up?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I'm keep saying that next year I'm gonna go, next year I'm gonna go. It's on my list, but with grad school and everything, like, that's hard to I have to pick and choose my expenses, so
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, hold up your book one more time as we're going out. So, yeah, Sing to Me of Rain. It's awesome middle grade fantasy that I think your kids will love. I really enjoyed it. I'm not all the way through it yet, but I really enjoyed it. But thank you, Elizabeth, so much for being here, and thank you for sharing about your books.
Thank you, Trisha. Thanks for having me.